This is the second part of the systems thinking book. It's very dry, pretty boring. The book doesn't go into applications until the latter half of the book, so it just gives you the basis and foundations of what's going on in the system. And right now I think this section is about relationships within each system, parts or elements, and the concept of systems within systems. I tend to be a workaholic and all I think about is work, so a lot of the applications about systems thinking, it applies to my work. So that's what I have examples for. So continuing with systems thinking and its relationships. So to think in systems, think of how not only A affects B, but how B affects A. Again, if you can talk about relationships and people, how people affect each other. So for example, if a work relationship between your boss and yourself, is this like a one-way relationship? Clearly it's not, but are you deferring to their authority and not exercising your right or to own your part of that relationship to affect your boss? So be aware of seemingly one-way relationships and try to find the impact or importance of the reverse relationship and what that means for the context of that situation. Systems thinking helps us not to look for people to blame, but what systems are in place to create the current environment. Again, I think this might have been out of place. This should be with the importance of the systems itself and how to leverage change within the system, rather than first going to change the parts of the elements of the system, since that creates the least amount of impact. Changing the system, improving the system creates the most impact. So don't go looking for people to blame or groups of people to blame, because that's not gonna generate as much change as if you change the systems and the relationships within the systems itself, the feedback loops as well. Be aware that systems can exist inside other systems, so stop to interact with each other. Again, I tend to be a people person, so if you apply these to people, you can talk about emotions and how your supervisor or your colleague are in different systems. They're in a family system, work system, or any other environment that they're in, and each environment will bleed over to another. So you might be stuck on a framework of seeing the system as a work system, work environment system. However, their emotions are tied to other systems like work and family and relationships outside work. So that awareness can explain their behavior. I'm not quite sure if the author meant for systems thinking to apply to psychology or behavior, but I think it's a nice tool to have. We'll see if it actually is meant to do that, and the possible harms to put systems thinking into behavior, since humans aren't rational. But can you put rationality into humans? But if you think in systems, I don't know. It sounds interesting. The information delivered by a feedback loop can only affect future behavior. Actually, let me write that down. That's an interesting thought. Can we rationalize people? We know that people are not rational and make decisions based on emotions. But can we add some degree of rationality by viewing people through a systems lens? information delivered by a feedback loop can only affect future behavior. The delivery time isn't fast enough to impact to correct the current feedback. There will always be delays in responding. The book gives an application of this through inventory ordering. So for example, if your company is selling too much out of a car and therefore you're trying to fix the situation by ordering more cars to sell, but when the order comes in, it'll be way into the future, so your response isn't necessarily addressing the current situation now, but the future situation. And of course, there's always be delays in responding. So for in this system, the delivery of those cars back into your workplace is the delay. Maybe even the approval of those orders is the delay. So a mental model has to include the important system flows to understand and predict the system's behavior. I recorded this video earlier and it was having problems. So importing a block reference. I actually have can link mental models because I remember reading another book with mental models. So you can do Control-Shift, click on the word, and it'll bring up this page on the side, which lists all the instances where mental models came from. And then I drag, I think click Shift, drag this definition here, since I didn't define it in here. As you can see, it's an embed right here. To put, why do I have a period? So oh no, this is just a reference actually, so I won't be able to change it. So I have to change it here for that to work over here. So this is just a reference. Be aware that some feedback loops within a system is more dominant than others that affects the behavior of the system. So this is pretty self-explanatory. System delays. Changing the delays in the system can make it easier or much harder to manage the oscillations. So going back to the example of inventory ordering of cars, if you're a car salesman person, you could change the ordering inventory every week, every 3 days, or every 2 weeks, and the oscillation of your inventory can be changed depending on the length of time between the actions that you respond, based on the response that you're having due to the feedback loop. System constraints. Systems have constraints that eventually affect the dominant reinforcing loop. For example, oil is the natural constraint of a system that rely on oil and its derivative products. So oil is a natural constraint, meaning that the stock in the system, which is oil, is constraining the production. Any system that creates the production of oil and its derivatives is going to be constrained by the oil stock, so that makes sense. When we look at growth of a system, we look for reinforcing feedback loop that are driving growth and for the balancing feedback loop that constrains it. So reinforcing feedback loops could be demand for oil derivative products, and balancing feedback loops are possibly the extraction of that oil. The more oil that you extract from the ground, the less it becomes. A feedback loop could be the cost and resources to extract deeper from the ground, or the cost of oil itself as it becomes less and less of that resource. So resources are stocks. There are non-renewable resources are stock limited. The entire stock is available at once and may be extracted at any time, but limited to the technology and capital of the extraction method. Again, example is the oil. The less oil that you have, the deeper it is, the more difficult it is to extract. While if you have a lot of oil available, the first extraction of that oil is a lot easier since it's closer to the surface. Renewable resources are flow limited. The system with renewable resources can support extraction or harvest indefinitely, but only a finite flow rate equal to their generation. This makes sense. This is like if you're fishing for fish, you can only fish the same amount of fish to support regeneration of the fish population. If you overfish, then you can crash your renewable resources. Outcomes of renewable resources to adjustment. So these are if you overfish, overshoot an adjustment to sustainable equilibrium, overshoot beyond that equilibrium, followed by oscillation around it, overshoot followed by collapse of the resource and the industry dependent on that resources. So these are the possible things that you could do to a non-renewable resource. So for example, if you overfish and then you see that you're overfishing, you can decrease your fishing rate to let the fish population catch up to sustainable equilibrium again. Or you can overfish past that equilibrium and then you can have ups and downs within the fish population. Or if you really overfish, then you could crash this whole fish population and you no longer have a renewable resource. Managing systems. Recognize and identify what structures contain which latent behaviors and what conditions release those behaviors. Then rearrange the structures and conditions to reduce destructive behavior and promote beneficial ones. So I wish I had examples. I think the book does have examples. I think we can go back to our renewable resources. So what this means is what structures contain which latent behaviors and what conditions release those behaviors. Promote beneficial ones. I actually need an example for this, otherwise I'm just guessing and I don't want to guess. I'll come back to this at a later point in time. So again, this part was just the definitions of managing systems. I think I'll stop here for now. The next part of the book is more interesting as it applies systems thinking into different applications and how we can apply that through different environments and different contexts. Again, I tend to be a workaholic, so I tend to apply my reading into work. So until next time.